Joining us now, Pulitzer Prize-winning columnist and associate editor of The Washington Post and MSNBC political analyst, Eugene Robinson. President of the Council on Foreign Relations and author of the forthcoming book, The World, A Brief Introduction, Richard Haass, and NBC News presidential historian Michael Beschloss. He's the author of the book, Presidents of War, the epic story from 1807 to modern times.
Well, Richard Haass, this is all too predictable. You look at the number of deaths in Spain over the past 24 hours. You look at what's happening in Italy over the past several weeks. This is all predictable. It's all too predictable. And yet U.S. policymakers seem to be mired in gridlock while the White House continues to be running in circles, talking about an invisible virus while doing nothing to reveal its existence through widespread testing.
Well, Joe, your metaphor of the morning has been war, and we're fighting a two-front war. We're fighting a medical public health war, and we're fighting an economic war. And right now, there's not a lot of progress to talk about on either front. I think potentially there could be more progress on the economic war once Congress and the administration decide what it is they're prepared to do with the strength of the private sector. The much more difficult one is the public health war. And that's where, how would I put it? It's anything but Churchillian. Rather than leveling with the American people, rather than preparing them for the hardship to come, the president constantly looks at false cures. He talks about how soon we're going to get back to normalcy. If anything, it should be just the opposite. It'd be much better to be president and prepare people for the worst and not have things turn out that bad than to have the opposite, where you hold out false hope. That hope is demonstrated to be false. And then you have this psychological, political, economic letdown of a country that wasn't prepared for what's hit them.
Well, especially since you think the president would do that now, and we've been, in effect, pleading with him over the past several weeks to start doing that, because this is a president who ignored his own intel briefings in January and February when he was warned that this was coming. This was a president who ignored what needed to be done as far as testing goes. This is a president who was still talking about the media and his supporters talking about how the media was ginning up a hoax about how bad this was going to be. He said, Michael Beschloss, that this was going to be, there are like 15 people who have it. It'll be down to 0. That came about a week after he said, oh, there's only one person from China who has it, and they'll be gone soon. And so here we find ourselves in a situation where millions of people could die.
A little bit different from war presidents in our history. You know, Joe, I think the greatest war leader we ever had in the presidency was Franklin Roosevelt. And everyone remembers it in terms of a big victory, but go back to December of 1941. Roosevelt made terrible mistakes moving the ships to Pearl Harbor. They were all there sitting ducks. There was an attack. So Americans were saying, this is the president we've got in wartime who brought us Pearl Harbor. But the thing is that Roosevelt very quickly recouped. He took a nation that in 1940 was as divided as probably we have ever been in terms of people who thought we should go to war against Hitler and the Japanese and people who thought we should not. And he said, essentially, I've got a plan. I'm going to, run my part and America's part in a global war for unconditional surrender. The news is going to be worse before it gets better, but I'm going to level with you. He gave those fireside chats. He said, the White House would put out, everyone should go out and buy maps and globes tonight, before the president's speech so they can follow along while he tells what's going to happen in the Pacific. That's what a great war leader is. Johnson talked about the war on poverty. Nixon talked about the war on cancer. You've had presidents use that metaphor, but great war leadership, I think, is embodied in what FDR did in World War II.
So this morning, the Ford Motor Company announced that it would lend their engineering and manufacturing expertise to quickly expand production of urgently needed medical equipment and supplies for healthcare workers, first responders, and patients fighting the coronavirus. The auto giant joins General Motors and Tesla, who announced earlier this week they are devoting resources to help solve the nation's shortages of ventilators. So, Michael Beschloss, obviously this has echoes of a past time where these companies stepped in. But would the defense production act? I mean, if the president, wouldn't that be a way he could coordinate this better?
Yes, and that's another big test of presidents in wartime, because it's a test of whether they can mobilize resources, both public and private. That's why I was glad at first to hear Donald Trump say he was thinking of himself as a wartime leader, because I thought, that's sort of the message to all of us, that he now is going to use every resource he's got to try to mobilize this country against this virus.
Right.
It's Jonathan.
But he's not using it.
Your latest piece in the Washington Post is about, bluntly, that the president, as usual, is making things worse. Tell us what you mean by that, and in particular, perhaps zero in on what we saw yesterday in his seemingly move to reopen the nation and its economy against the advice of his health experts.
Well, it's what we've seen, Jonathan. We just heard Michael Beschloss tell us what sort of presidential leadership we could really use in this war against this plague, against the COVID-19. And what we've got instead was a long period of denial. We got a long period of inaction, and now we have a reaction, a response that's all about Donald Trump, as everything is with Donald Trump. It's all about Donald Trump. On Sunday, he was complaining that no one thanks him for not taking his presidential salary. Yesterday, he was obviously itching to begin reopening the economy prematurely over the objections of the medical personnel who know better. I mean, we all saw the heartbreaking, terrible scenes from Italy. We saw just now those same scenes repeated in Spain. And if you look at you plot it on a graph, and you look at the way, in not just infections but deaths in this country are skyrocketing, and the rate of increase, and you see that those very pictures we're going to be seeing here in our country if we don't act. And using the Defense Production Act to mandate the production of ventilators and other equipment, and to get it, using the military if necessary to get it to the right places at the right time. That is the kind of thing that could head off what I fear is coming.
Well, and it is unfortunately coming, and public health officials have been saying for weeks now that the window is closing for the United States to take decisive action. Unfortunately, I fear we're running out of time very quickly. Richard Haass, when all of this is done and we look back on this pandemic, you can already tell by looking at the Johns Hopkins numbers that are put out in graph form every day at the Financial Times, that Asian countries like South Korea, Japan, Singapore, Hong Kong, and yes, even China, were far more successful at flattening the curve than Western countries have been. We have failed miserably in Italy. We failed miserably in Spain, and now I fear we may make the same mistakes in the United States. Why such an extreme difference between Asia's response and the West's response?
Yeah, it seems to me the lesson here is that the democracies can do well. The Asian democracies have done well, and South Korea foremost, but they were willing to act early and decisively. Essentially, they said, take your pain early in order to avoid even greater pain later. And you had leadership that demanded it. Another metaphor that comes to mind here, but also Italy and Spain, is the uncertain trumpet. Rather than having a consistent, strong note, well, we've been vacillating all over the place in the various phases of this crisis. And I think, we often say the expression speed kills, Joe. Here it's just the opposite. The absence of speed kills. This doesn't get better with time. Either we get ahead of this or it gets ahead of us and on top of us. And I think that's the lesson. So the authoritarians did it in their way, like China, after an initial cover-up. That's not our model. But I think what South Korea and Japan show us, Singapore is a mixed country, in the sense that open societies can mobilize. We can do things, but what you have to do is signal and then act on that signal.
And Michael, and yet at this time of crisis, We have a White House vacillating and a Congress in gridlock.
Which just makes people more frustrated because they wonder where the leadership is coming from. And, you know, another part of this, Joe, you know, looking at great war leaders in American history, you've got to see empathy in the president. Abraham Lincoln, during the Civil War, so many Union soldiers were getting killed that they went to the president. They said, we need to build a new cemetery. Where do you want it? Lincoln said, build it right near my summer cottage because I want to see, you know, the results of the terrible decisions that I'm making day after day. I want people to know that I understand what they're going through.
All right, and as we close, Eugene Robinson writes in the Washington Post, you can see his full piece there, that the nation is suffering through a terrible crisis day by day, tweet by tweet, unhinged briefing by unhinged briefing. President Trump is making it worse. And as we close, you know, if anyone can get it to them, we want to know about testing. We want to know about masks and protective equipment. We want to know about hospitals. Eugene Robinson, Richard Haass, Michael Beschloss, thank you very much. That does it for us this morning. Stephanie Rule picks up the coverage after a short break.
Thanks for checking out MSNBC on YouTube, and make sure you subscribe to stay up to date on the day's biggest stories. And you can click on any of the videos around us to watch more from Morning Joe and MSNBC. Thanks so much for watching.